Welcome to Honoring the Journey. My name is Leslie Nease, and I'm your host. And today, oh my goodness, I've told you before that I have a little list of people who I that were like my dream guests, people who I couldn't wait to ask, and I hope that they would say yes. And today's guest is that guest, one of them. His name is Thomas J. Oord. I think I can call him Tom. Can I call you
Yes,
Tom?
please
Okay.
do.
Or Tom. And here's the thing about Tom. I just told him for the very first time that while I was going through my deconstruction, his book called God Can't was very, very helpful to me in trying to figure out who God was in my life. You kind of don't want to throw everything out and you just kind of want
Mm,
to pick it apart and see what do I really believe. And so his book was really helpful. And then I've heard him on some podcasts. And of course, I follow him on social media. So I invited him and he said yes. And I was like, are you kidding me? Oh my gosh.
uh,
Oh, wonderful. But Tom is a theologian, a philosopher, which together, those two things, I love that you do both of those because they're so like contradictory, it seems, although they're probably not. But
yeah,
he's a speaker and a scholar, a best-selling and award-winning author. He directs a doctoral program at Northwinds Theological Seminary and directs the Center for Open and Relational Theology. And the cool thing too, and I just got it today. Tom just wrote a book with his friend Trip Fuller, and it's called God After Deconstruction, which I think is probably going to be along the lines of like super helpful, the way your God Can't was with me, but I think
mm.
even in more so ways with people going through deconstruction. So, Tom, welcome to Honoring the Journey.
Thanks so much for the invitation, Leslie. I am really looking forward to this.
Yeah, it's going to be so much fun. I like to start. This is a new thing I just started, and so far it's gone really, really well. We've enjoyed it. The last two people that I had on, I did this. I take a random question just to get to know you as Tom, like just the
Okay.
guy, not the
Yeah.
theologian. You don't have to teach us anything. We just want to know who you are as a human being because that's important. So I'm going to ask a question. You probably it's so I was thinking this is kind of trite, but it's so fun to ask. So, what is your most embarrassing moment? Your most embarrassing story from your past?
I've got so many, and most of them have to do with nakedness or sex. So let's see.
You're fine.
Okay. But one of the earliest ones, my mother is very entrepreneurial, and she decided she was going to start a business in the basement of our house where my bedroom is downstairs, so is my brother's, and it was a stitchery stained glass sort of artsy studio.
Oh.
And so she put this together, and women would then come to our house, and actually men, but mostly women. And one time I was taking a shower and decided to walk buck naked down the hallway to my room, not knowing
Uh-oh.
the store was filled with mostly women.
Oh,
So that was
no.
one of the earliest, yeah, embarrassing moments of my life.
That's horrifying. I am so sorry. Did anybody say anything? Was there screams or
Uh, my mother noticed, but I think the ladies were just kind enough not to say
Oh,
anything.
that's good.
And I was probably in junior high at the time or so, so I,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Oh, that's
pretty
funny.
embarrassing.
That's so cute. Well, they were probably all moms and they all saw it before. So they were like, "Eh, whatever."
Exactly, yeah,
Been there,
yeah.
done that,
Yeah, but to a
seen the
junior high
preteen before.
boy, a junior high boy doesn't know that.
Thank you for sharing that, and I'm sorry that happened to you, but it's actually really funny in retrospect. Um, okay, so you are, I mean, we all know theologian, philosopher, speaker, all of this stuff. So have you always done this? Is this something you did when you were in Christianity or evangelical? What religion did you practice in?
Yeah, I still am a Christian.
Mhm.
I still consider myself part of that tradition. But I grew
Perfect.
up in a little denomination called the Church of the Nazarene, which is
Oh yeah.
kind of like conservative Methodists.
Okay.
And I was one of these. Yeah, I was like in whole hog. My family was a pillar of the church, and my parents did all kinds of things, and so did I. So, and I still am. I'm still an ordained elder in the Church of the Nazarene, although
Oh, awesome.
I'm I'm uh, I'm going to be going to trial for being queer affirming. So we'll see how much
Wait,
longer I'm
you
still a
have to
part
go
of
to
this.
trial? Oh,
Yeah,
within the religion. Wow.
yes, yeah,
Interesting.
within domination. Yeah.
Wow.
So that's my tradition. We'll see how much longer they'll keep me.
Well, you wanna stay though, that's important, and, I think it's beautiful, and I think I love that your voice is on this podcast because so many people who've been on are no longer associated with their previous tradition at all,
Yeah.
and so to hear that you're still connected is really awesome. I love that,
I
yeah.
I don't want to sort of sound like I think everybody ought to stay in whatever
Right.
tradition they're in. I think there are really good reasons to walk away. But for me, I've had the ability, resources, I don't know what it is, but I've felt like if I stay, maybe I can make some changes and help those who come behind me, especially when I realized that so many in the tradition are like me, they want to see changes. So it's
Yeah.
not like I'm the lone voice and there's lots of others like me. So
Mhm.
why not?
A lot of people start out that way. Like, even
Yes.
me, when I first started deconstructing, I was like, "I'm not going anywhere."
Yeah.
You can leave and run away, or you can make a change and help make a difference, but it
Yep.
just didn't work out for me, but that's okay. I tried.
Yeah.
And it
I
sounds like,
wonder if
with you going to trial, like, for what you're standing up for, rights for everyone, that's gonna be, I think, a pivotal moment for you. That's important.
Yeah, it probably also helped with full disclosure. This is my third trial.
Oh,
So, like,
wow.
um, yeah, I've been through the ringer a few times already. So, I guess also, I was thinking about this the other day. I'm in my late 50s now.
Mhm.
If I was much younger, I probably wouldn't have the same approach to this as I do right now. But, I've grown up in this tradition. I have so many friends. I've invested myself. Um, I kind of think, well, look, I'm here. Why not try to make changes? And if they push me out, well, that's on them.
Right,
Um,
yeah.
and that's kind of my approach.
That's great. I love that. So
Yeah.
you grew up in that tradition and you're kind of still in it. When did you start realizing maybe some of the things that you were taught weren't kind of the direction you wanted to keep going in, when you wanted to start making a change?
Yeah. So this is another weird thing about me. I was I was a outside the box rebellious thinker even as a teenager. Like
Mm,
I knew there were things wrong with the church broadly speaking and the church in my little, town that I grew up in. But there were enough other people in that church and the denomination that I felt like, again, I wasn't the only one calling for change. Now, the kind of change I thought was important as a teenager is different than today.
right,
It took
yeah.
it took me another, well, I was in my mid 20s before I became queer affirming, and so there were some things that changed along the way. But I guess I want to say, um, I was never fully satisfied
Mm,
with the tradition, with whatever views I was given. I always felt like there we ought to go deeper, we ought to think more differently, we ought to somehow be better.
mm.
Uh, yeah.
Yeah. Well, good. And so you started coming up against some of these things, and were you fighting for change even as in your 20s, or how did that look?
Yeah, but it looked a lot different than now. In my 20s, it was more about looking at my fellow Christians and saying, "You're not going hard enough. You're not strong enough. You're hypocritical, or you are really stuck in the status quo, and you want to be upwardly mobile. And I think we ought to be, helping the outsiders, the least of these, those who are at the margins." So, like,
Mhm.
I was in punk bands and things like that. That was my way of trying to make change at that time. But I wasn't really questioning God's existence until the end of my college career. I was
Mm.
more of a, you know, you've got a bad view of God. I know there's a God. You've got a bad view. Here, let me give you a better view kind of approach.
Oh, interesting. So how did you start those studies? Like, what did you read, or what did you go
Yeah.
to?
Well, in my final year of college, I took a course in philosophy of religion because I was a religion major preparing for ministry.
Mhm,
And in that course, I started reading people outside the tradition, atheists, agnostics, and arguments against God's existence. And it was for the sake of intellectual honesty that I had to admit I didn't really have good reasons to believe in God at all. In fact, I remember coming to pick up my fiance, who's now my wife, her
Mhm.
getting in the car and me looking at her and saying, I can't believe in God anymore. I
Oh,
just didn't think I had good reasons to.
wow. So what did she say?
Well, she took it pretty well. I think it'd be good to have her here so she could speak for herself. But I think at that point in her life, she was so excited about getting married to me, and she had a lot of confidence in me. It probably threw her for a loop, but she was willing to stick stick with it, because she
Yeah.
had confidence in me.
Oh, I
Um,
love that.
yeah.
That's beautiful. So has she been you guys have been on the same page pretty much through this whole journey?
I would say if she was here, she would say I'm always a few steps ahead of her.
Mhm.
Um, and the way we think about religion is very different. She's always been a person for whom the community and relationship aspects are most important. Like we
Yeah,
joke
me
that
too.
when we go to church, her favorite times are what happens before the music starts and after the last prayer.
Oh my gosh. You know what? I need to meet your wife. It sounds like we would be besties, totally.
Yeah, yeah,
Oh, that's fun.
yeah. So
That's great.
she had objections, she had questions all along like I did, but not to the degree that I did probably.
Mhm.
And yeah, I think she was more worried about the broken connections and relationships
Mm.
than I was. And
Yeah.
so that just affected us differently.
Yeah, that sounds actually pretty familiar. My husband's not like a theologian or anything. He's a businessman, and he had a
Yeah.
very hard time fitting in to the church
Mhm,
culture
mhm.
because there's no place for you except to tithe. And
Yeah.
so like the only time they wanted him around was when they needed money for something. And so, I think he never really bought into it, but he saw that I was thriving in it
Mm,
because of the community and the connection and my relationship with God. I was just so on fire, and so he just always supported me. And when I started
yeah.
asking questions, I didn't even tell him because I didn't want him, I didn't even, I don't know, for years, I didn't even talk to him about my doubts because I was
Mhm.
like, I don't want to, I felt like I was responsible for his faith in a way.
Oh,
And
yeah, yeah.
then, and so when I finally started talking to him, he's like, "Oh yeah, babe, I've seen that for years." Like he was going
Uh,
through it. He had already been through it, but he didn't talk to me either because he didn't want to bring me down and I didn't want to
yeah.
bring him down. Come to find out, he had already figured it out years before I did. But there was no
Interesting.
way he was going to tell me that because he didn't want to take
Hmm.
away my joy. And
Yeah,
so
that's
I
kind of
really
it.
respect him for that. And we've
Yeah.
we've always, we've always communicated, but for some reason I didn't want to share that part of myself with him until I knew what I felt. I wasn't even sure what I was going through.
Well,
Um,
who did you share with before you shared with him? Did you just keep it to yourself?
I kept it to myself. I mean,
Yeah.
there's one friend of mine I knew from Christian radio who I knew was more progressive. Shared with that person a little bit,
Mm,
and that person was so encouraging to me,
mm,
and just helped me not to feel crazy. But I didn't
mm.
talk to them a lot. I just, maybe twice, maybe three times. But sometimes when you're what I refer to as the invisible, the person who is going through deconstruction online, looking for voices that are saying what you're thinking just so you can feel normal. But you don't want anybody to know where you're
Mm,
at, when you're that invisible person and you see somebody and respect talking about things online that you're like, that tracks with me. That
yep.
person's, you'll reach out to that person. And so I think that's why last year I decided to get more vocal about my deconstruction after, 5, 6, 7 years, I don't know, many years of silence, is because my heart goes out so much to people. I like might cry about like to people who are just like so scared. And it's
Yeah.
like, like your wife afraid to let go of the community and
Mhm.
the judgment. Sorry.
Yep.
Whew.
No, it makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
And I also suspect that given your profession, you're
Mhm.
probably pretty good at putting on a particular kind of face
Yeah.
and going through, the motions and things and saying the right words
And I
because,
hated it.
yeah, I'll bet.
The breaking point, I was on a Moody radio show, and this
Yeah.
was like 3 years ago, and I was on the show, and And it was like I went right back into Sister Christian. That's what I was
Mhm.
called. I
Mm.
went right back into that, saying everything I knew that needed to be said with conviction, feeling so sure that, and then I got off the radio and I wanted to throw up. I was like, I just
Mm.
pretended. I don't know if I believe this anymore.
Yep.
And then they called me back and they're like, we want you to be a regular on the show. And I was like, I can't do that, and so, like, I quit doing Christian radio because I was doing some stuff for a station in Las Vegas, just, like, on the weekends, nothing major, but just to keep my toe in the water, but I had
Yep.
to quit, and I just started to just let go, and, man, when you're not just letting go of your faith, tradition, and your community, but it's now my livelihood. This is my job, my
Right.
career, and so because of the things that I've been through is why I do what I do now, is to
Yeah,
help
that makes
people.
perfect sense, yeah.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
was gonna say it's very similar to the pastors who I talk to who also deconstruct, and for
yeah,
them, that means, like, I'm gonna walk away not only from my community and what in some cases, what I've been telling my kids is the right thing to do or the only right thing to do, maybe is a better way to put it, but
right.
also walking away from my livelihood, and many of them are, mid-career. What am I gonna switch to next? It's
Yeah,
very tough.
yeah, and I that's when I found the podcast. Have you heard of Recovery?
Oh, yeah, I know Sarah, yeah.
Okay. Oh, God, I love her.
Yeah.
They are the first place that I shared my story with last August.
Okay.
Because I found them because I was like, they were talking about what I need to hear, like, what am I doing next? All I know is
Yeah,
ministry. How do I help people? How do I do this? How do I redeem my voice? A
yeah.
voice that's been saying these things for so long. How do I,
Mm,
it was really, really hard. But she gave me that opportunity to share. And once I did and the cat was out of the bag, so to speak, I realized this is there's a high cost.
yep.
People lose respect for you. People think you're a, heretic or a heathen or I've been
Two-faced.
oh, yeah. Oh, that has been the hardest thing is people
Yeah,
say, "You came and spoke at my church. You
yep,
lied to me." And I'm like, "No,
yeah,
that was 100% authentically who I was at the time." But
right.
people change. Like, and I think it's okay to get to a place in your life where you go, "You know what? This is not working for me anymore." Like,
Yeah,
I have to do something that is going to cost me greatly in order to be true to myself,
yep, yep.
you know?
Good for you, good for you. Can't help but think of, like, politics and
Yeah.
who we think of as the best kind of politician. Some
Mhm.
folks think the best politician stays the same no matter what, and the bad people are the wishy-washy flip-floppers or whatever,
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
I tend to think the good politicians change if change is necessary.
Yeah.
And
Well, I
and
mean,
so
when you get the full story, when you start to do the research, if
right,
things start to not add up, I respect somebody who says I was wrong.
me
Um,
too.
just had a lovely person send me a terrible message yesterday about
Mm,
she listened to a couple of my podcasts and it made her literally sick. And that
mm,
I'm, peddling a false gospel and trying to
yep.
bring people into my new religion. And I'm like, I think you're missing the point. Like, this is not about religion. That's the whole point here.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
that's
But
tough.
in that community that you and I have been a part of, there are certain, values. One of
Mm,
them is having the right set of beliefs that you have acknowledged.
yeah.
Another one is it's tribalism. It's our team is the right team, Team Jesus versus the rest of the world. So, if you're acting or saying things that is out of bounds for our tribe, well, then you can't be trusted. And the third
Yeah.
thing is they believe that since God never changes in any way whatsoever, then any other view other than the one they hold must be wrong. And
Yeah.
you used to hold that view, you've
Yeah.
changed, and so now there's something wrong with you. And
Well,
yeah,
clearly I
it's
have been deceived.
right. Yeah.
Clearly,
Yep.
and
Yeah.
and that I think that's the hard thing, but, it's been I had to go through it, I think, to get to this point of being free. I
Yeah.
I say God used it to inoculate me from the approval of other people. I used to
Oh,
live
yeah.
for that, and he has
Yep.
used deconstruction to literally when I got that message yesterday, normally I would fall apart
Yeah.
and just be like questioning everything. Maybe I am wrong. I didn't have one single doubt, and
Mm,
I had nothing but love for her and
mm,
sadness that she
yeah,
can't see, past theology to connection, and why, like, that's why I do this podcast. I want people to share their journeys so you can hear from the mouth of people who've gone through a faith transition instead of hearing from people in your faith tradition who think they know all about what deconstruction
yeah.
is. Yeah,
The
you've
people
done
who
some
say,
podcasts
well,
on that
yeah,
recently.
yeah, the people who say, well, she's deconstructing just because she wants to sleep around, or
Yeah.
he's deconstructing because he's just been hanging out with the wrong people and he's going to the way of the world, or all that
Mm.
sort of stuff. Yeah,
No, I think if you really look at it critically, you think about, like, it's kind of like if people really looked back at it and said, "Okay, wait, Leslie just gave up her entire career, her freedom in that community to have a voice, the
yep,
respect of, like, so many people. I've given up so much. Why would I do that if what
right,
I was giving it up for wasn't worth it?"
yep,
Um,
yep,
I just wouldn't. And I mean, your voice is so important in this deconstruction
mm,
community. And I guess what would you say to somebody who's just starting out in deconstruction? This is probably addressed in your book, God After
yeah.
Deconstruction, but like somebody who's scared and who's invisible online right now and trying to find those connections. What would you say to a person like that?
Well, I would say if they're trying to find those connections, that's a really good place to start,
Yeah.
because it's really hard to do this stuff all alone. You're going to feel all alone. It's going to be painful. It's going to be confusing. And so, if you can find some others who are on a similar journey or who have gone through it in the past, that can be so, so helpful.
Yeah.
Um, and fortunately today, because of social media, there's easier ways to find that kind of crowd. Just, go to Facebook and look for groups that are deconstructing or whatever, and you'll probably find some people to help you. But, even your local community, there might be people. When I
Mhm.
was a youth pastor in the 1990s, I found another youth pastor in the area, and we would get together for lunch and talk about theology. We called it the Dead Theologians Society, after the Dead Poets Society movie.
I love it.
Yeah. And, he was in a different place than I was, but it was a person who I could really have good, honest conversations with. And one of the
Mm.
things you find out once you start heading down this road, and it's painful as it is, you find out there's lots of other people, even people in significant positions of influence, who think like you do, but they just don't talk about it. They don't share about it. It's kind of behind the scenes,
Yeah.
and you know, it's understandable why they do what they do. But when you get to look behind the curtain, oftentimes you find out a lot of people think like you do.
Mm. Yeah. And that's been true for my journey as well. Cause like in coming forward, I was like, everybody's gonna hate me. You always think the worst. And yeah, there are people that hate me, and then I get it, whatever. I probably would have felt the same way several years ago. But then I have had way more people than have been negative send me DMs, and not they don't want to talk about it, but they want me to know that they're listening. I
Yep.
hear you and I'm with
Yep.
you. And I don't know how you have the guts to do this. And I'm like, I honestly, I don't either. I don't know. I think I'm just to the point I've gotten far enough in my journey and I've been able to sort of remove my identity from my faith,
Mm-hmm.
and put it into like me as a human.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
instead of like Sister Christian, which was what they called me on Survivor. So it's like
Yeah.
really hard to kind of get away from that. But once you do hear the people, and it may not be public, and that's okay. But
Yeah.
in literally every ministry I've ever worked in, there have been people who've reached out to me and said,
Good.
"Thank you for your voice. Thank you for doing what you're doing." And honestly, because I mean, I was a Christian woman brought up to serve and to be appreciated for what I did. You know what I mean? Like, because we
Yeah.
didn't make money, but people
Right.
sure did give us applause and thank you. And you're helping me. And so that was very fulfilling for me. And now in this place, you don't hear as much.
Yeah.
It's more quiet. So when I do get those things, it brings me like to life. I probably have to
Mm.
deal with that a little bit because, you know, it shouldn't. I should be fine without it, but it is nice.
Oh, you're human. We're all human, and
Yeah.
we need encouragement. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. Well, so we're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, I want you to talk about your book, right? And just what's next for Tom Ord. Does that sound good?
Okay. Sounds
Okay,
good.
great. And we're back with Honoring the Journey, talking with Tom Ord today. Let's get to talking a little bit more about what's next for you, because I know you just came out with a book that literally just landed in my mailbox today. Um,
Oh,
yes, I'm so excited. God After Deconstruction. You and Trip Fuller got together. So tell me a little bit about why you wrote this book and like who's the perfect person to read this?
well, the perfect person to read this is a person who either is in the midst of deconstructing or feels like they've kind of done their deconstructive work, but is searching for some framework to
Mm,
make sense of God, spirituality, their life, the world, or whatever. What we do in this book is look at 9 reasons people deconstruct. And we get these 9 from various surveys we did, other books, conversations, questionnaires, etc. And these reasons we think are legitimate reasons people leave, like, the church has harmed them, or they're queer, or their family member is queer and the church isn't accepting that person, or they've thought about God and evil and wondered why God didn't stop it and start to doubt that there's a God, or they take science seriously and, climate change and evolution makes a lot of sense, but their church thinks that's all a hoax and so they're walking away. So
mhm,
all of these legitimate reasons people are leaving. And then we want to offer what we call an open and relational theological alternative.
mm,
Open and relational theology is a way of looking at God that privileges God's love and says that God is in real giving and receiving relationship with us, such that we have a real influence on God, just like God influences us.
mm,
And we are moving through time, God is as well, into an open and yet to be determined future, which means that we're not predestined. We have real free will. And the future is, or our life is like an adventure because things haven't already been plotted out in a eternal divine blueprint or something like that. So
mm,
we take that general idea and apply it to these questions of deconstruction in every chapter and say, look, yeah, you're right to walk away from the church if you thought that God is in control and yet all these evil things happen. But what if God's not in control because God simply can't control because God is loving? That
mm.
kind of thing. That's the kind of approach.
I love that. And that's exactly what, God can't. That's what it helped me to understand. And it really, really, it was, I'm not even kidding. It felt like I had been pouring like alcohol into an open wound for so long. But then I
Mm.
read your book and it felt like I had like a healing balm over
Oh,
that wound.
that's
Like,
great.
oh, this makes sense. I love this. It made
Mm.
so much sense because I do think when you're brought up in a religion or a faith tradition that teaches you that God is in control of every little thing, for one thing, it negates your personal responsibility. And
Right. Yeah.
I literally just wrote a chapter in a book that I'm about personal responsibility. It's like either
Mhm.
God did it through me or Satan made me do it. It's like
Mhm.
where's the personal responsibility? And having to learn to do that is one of the reasons I think why I was so quiet in my deconstruction because I
Uh-huh.
didn't know who I was. I didn't know what I
Yeah.
was responsible for. I didn't know if I could trust my voice inside. I didn't know I had to get to know myself.
Can I put on my theologian's hat just for a
Yes.
second
Oh,
here?
please.
Oops,
Yes, please
excuse me.
do.
2 of the most influential Protestant theologians in the past are John Calvin and Martin Luther. Those are names that probably many of your
Yep.
listeners at least have heard of, even if they've
Or
never
they're
read.
triggered by. No, go
Yeah, are
ahead.
triggered by. That's right.
Good
And
morning.
John Calvin's view of humans and their responsibility was basically that God determines everything. God
Mhm,
is predestined from all eternity, and so every good and bad thing that happens, God has somehow decided those things, and whatever we think is bad is a part of some plan. Martin Luther had a little different twist on it. he thought that everything good that we did was God basically making us like a puppet and using us for good. But
Mhm.
everything bad we did, well, that was our fault. So we're bad people, and we were either tricked by the devil, or more likely in his theology, we're just selfish. We're
Mm.
curved in on ourselves. And so when you have that view of personal responsibility, you can't take any sort of credit for when things go good, but you get all the blame when
When
they
it
go
goes bad.
bad.
Or you can place
Right.
it on Satan. It's all Satan's
Or
fault.
state, sure, or you
That
can just be a
jerk.
pawn. Yeah,
You're just
yeah,
a pawn in their game. You know, I
yeah,
mean, I just remember thinking like, why am I even here? Like, why was I born just to be a pawn in
yes,
this like cosmic battle between good and evil? Like,
yep.
I don't know. To me, it made 0 sense, but I didn't question it until I was, out of it.
Yeah, and actually think it's worse for women here, at least women in those kinds of contexts, those conservative contexts, because so often women have less agency than men in general. And so it's much easier for them to think that, yep, either God controlled me or the devil controlled me, because they're supposed to be controlled by men, according to that tradition. And
Mhm.
so, yeah, kudos for you to think your way out of that issue and start to think about the importance of personal responsibility. Not only
Yeah.
personal responsibility for when you choose wrongly, but personal
When you
responsibility when
choose
you choose
good.
rightly. It's
Yes.
okay to say to someone who does good to you, "Thank you. I appreciate what you do." But in a strict Calvinist view, if God does it all, you shouldn't ever thank another person. You should only thank God. Yeah.
Well, I remember when people would say, "Oh my goodness, that message meant so much to me, Leslie. Thank you so much for that." And I would be like, "It wasn't me. It was
Yes, it was
all
the Holy
God.
Spirit.
It was
Yeah,
the Holy
exactly.
Spirit in me. Don't
Yes.
look at me. I'm a piece of junk. I don't know
Yep.
what I'm doing. He used me as a vessel. I got out of the way." And
Yeah.
it's just like to me, if my child ever said that to me, if my or to anyone, if my child said, "Oh, no, 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 I'm nothing," it's
Yeah.
because my mom gave birth to me and raised me. It's all about her. I would throw up. I would be like, "Are you
Yeah.
joking? No, take some responsibility. Good stuff is
Yeah.
good," and
That's
and
a
and I
great
think
analogy. I like that analogy a lot. That's good.
well, it's true. I mean, I think that in deconstruction for me, because all I know is being a mom. I mean, even on
Yep.
Survivor, yes, they called me Sister Christian. They also called me mom. And I have 4
Mhm.
children who are all adults now. So like being a mom has been the joy and just the definition of my life. And
Mhm.
so I think when I was in deconstruction, a lot of what I wrestled with, I thought of, okay, if God is our parent,
Mm.
what would he d or she or they, what would
Yes.
God do what
Yep.
in this situation? And how would that make me feel as a parent if my child kept telling me, "I am nothing without you. I am
Right.
nothing." And I'm like, "Oh, no, but you're everything. Like, how can you not see it?" And
Mm.
to me, that being a parent rocked my world.
That's one of the reasons why in open and relational theology, we often talk about a primary metaphor of God as a loving mother or father or parent,
Mm,
because there's so many good analogies you can use with that. But another dimension that I think I should throw in here is that we in the community think that humans and all of creation has intrinsic value, which means that you're valuable in and of and for yourself, in addition to being valuable for the sake of others, what's sometimes called instrumental value. But
mhm.
that means that you are intrinsically valuable, good, you have talents, you have something to offer, and you should affirm that. It doesn't mean you know everything and you're greatest and never sinned or anything like that.
No,
But
no.
it means that you have genuine value, and so many people need to hear that message.
Oh, Tom, I am one of those people. Let me just tell you something. Like I've been a fitness instructor for 32 years. And I
Mm,
think the reason that I teach it is because it's so much easier for me to get out there and do a workout when I know it's benefiting someone else. And I
mm,
always, when I became a Christian, it was a year into my surrender that I was on Christian radio and
mm,
speaking and doing these things because I was like, it's not just about me, it's about everyone. As long as I'm doing things for everyone else,
yeah.
I'm valuable. And I
Mm,
never learned how to do things for myself until deconstruction. And that's, I
mm,
think,
mm,
why God was so insistent. Leslie, just be still and be alone. You need to
Yeah.
do this for you. You don't do this for anyone else. When it's
Mm.
over, we'll see what happens, but like right now, do this for you. And it was the hardest transition because I'm like, what good is my life if I'm not offering it?
That's the way many Christians will define love. It's what you
Right.
do for others. They
Yep.
have no room for self love. And I think that's crucial. Yes, we should love others. Yes, we should love our enemies, but we should also love ourselves. And that's an
Mhm.
appropriate thing, in part because God calls us to love all creation and we're part of that creation. So, yeah,
Yeah.
we ought to love ourselves. You have children and you want them to know that you think they're intrinsically valued, they have worth, they have agency and self responsibility. But
Mhm.
suppose they deny all that and do the kind of things that we've been talking about, reject their own responsibility and value. They also become easy prey for those who want to use them for
Mm.
these other people's agendas. They
Yep.
become little tools in whatever games people have to play. And so many Christians I see end up being tools for powerful, usually men, powerful
Mhm.
people in Christianity because they're thought, well, you're supposed to be just like the sheep who does whatever the shepherd says. You're worth nothing unless the shepherd tells you to do this. And therefore, Pastor Jimmy wants you to do X, Y, and Z. Yeah, it's real
Yeah.
problematic.
Yeah, it definitely can lead to some I had to work through a tremendous amount of self-loathing,
Mhm.
um, that I like, because I was doing everything for everyone else. Imagine, like, the most important relationship you have is with yourself, and imagine if that relationship was so toxic that you felt like you weren't worth anything. Like,
Yeah, yeah.
it's just terrible, and I know it sounds like I know if I was an evangelical listening, which I'm probably not at this point. I think they've all turned it off by now, but if I am still listening, thank you for listening, by the way, if you are. I just want you to know, it sounds like I am overstating this, like I'm being dramatic, and I'm not. Like, these are the kinds of things that I could not see until
Mhm,
I got out of that environment and
mm,
started to do the research and do the hard soul work. I mean, it was a dark night of the soul. And when
mhm.
I did that is when I started to see. And now that I see it, I can't unsee it. I can't
Right.
unsee it. And now I think one of the reasons that the voice is out there saying these things is not to hurt or belittle or burn a bridge with the church, but it's more to help the people that are at that point understand that you're going to be okay. Like, this
Yeah,
is going to be the hardest thing you've ever done in your life, but you're going to be okay. There's
yeah,
hope.
yeah. Well, what I also find is that many people go through deconstruction and they do a pretty good job of unlearning the crap that they've been
Mhm.
taught by whatever religious tradition they're in the case of you and me, Christianity.
Mhm.
But then they don't really know where to go next. And they
Right.
have these deep intuitions about, morality, goodness, love, that there's something beyond themselves that transcends themselves, but they
Mhm.
don't have what I call a theological framework to put
Right.
those intuitions into. And that's why part of the reason we wrote this book is to say, look, there is a way of thinking that makes sense of your moral intuitions. It makes sense philosophically with science. It even makes sense of the good parts of the Bible. um,
Yeah.
and you can come to this and now have a place to kind of hang those deep intuitions that you can't get away from. You can hang them here and they make sense in this framework.
Yeah, and there are people that need that. They
Yes.
need to have a framework. That is the I think that's the dark night of the soul when you're at that point.
Yeah.
And so it's actually, oh, I cannot wait to go. I mean, I don't want to end the interview or anything, but once I do, I'm gonna go pick up that book out of my 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 mailbox and get reading. But I feel like that's an important thing to say. Like,
Yeah.
you got to have a framework, because that without a framework, we're just kind of floating around trying to figure out how to make sense of our world and out of
Right.
our purpose and who we are and what is all this about, and
Yep.
when you let go of religion, you are letting go of something so pivotal and so instrumental in keeping you grounded.
Yeah.
So it's important that you find something, but that something, um, don't dig your nails in so deep
Right. I like
that
to say this is a framework that's flexible and
yeah,
always open to change.
mm,
So you can alter it. If
yeah,
something comes along and you think, well, I need to shift here, go for it. This framework doesn't require you to sign every jot and tittle and all the kind
yeah.
of
Well,
25
and
propositions.
if you don't believe it, you're gonna go burn for all of eternity,
Right. Yeah.
you
We
know?
don't believe in hell. So
I was gonna
yeah,
ask you, what
there's
was
no
your
credit.
view? What's your view
Yeah.
on hell? Do you have a view, or do you just
I
what's
do.
your
Yeah.
I would love to hear
Uh,
that.
Yeah, I have a perspective I call the relentless love view. And to
Hmm,
set it up, let me
I like
compare it
that.
to, oh, good. Let me compare it to three other major views that maybe some of your listeners have heard. One, of course, is the classic heaven and hell view. That makes no sense to me because I don't think a loving God would send anybody to eternal conscious torment.
Yep.
Second option is sometimes called conditionalism or annihilationism. And it says the good people get to go to heaven, but the bad people are killed off, burned up, annihilated is the official
Mhm.
word. And while that has the advantage of not sending anybody to hell for eternity, it strikes me as painting God as giving up on some people.
Yeah.
And I don't find that helpful. The
Or
third idea,
biblical.
or biblical, yeah, yeah, steadfast love of the Lord endures
Right.
forever.
He's not gonna give
uh,
up until the day of completion,
yeah,
not the day
yeah.
of destruction.
You're
I don't know.
right. Nice. I like that. And then the third view is sometimes called classical universalism. And there's some famous theologians in the 20th century and 21st who hold it. It basically says everybody goes to heaven no matter what they do, even if they don't want to. And the problem with this view is that it requires God to have the kind of power to make sure people go to the good place even against their will, or at least
Mm,
somehow manipulate them in such a way. And if God has that kind of power in the afterlife, you would wonder why God doesn't use that power now to prevent the really rotten stuff that
yeah.
sometimes happens in our lives.
Oh, good
So,
point.
yeah. So, my view is this fourth one. It says this: God, moment by moment, invites us into a love relationship, and we have the freedom to cooperate with that invitation or not. When we don't cooperate, there are natural negative consequences that come. God doesn't punish us or anything like that, but just when you say no to what's good, you're saying yes to what's not so good. Of course, when you say yes to God's love, then you experience the kind of goodness, abundant life, flourishing, etc., that we oftentimes talk about. And this idea that God is always offering this love relationship continues on into the afterlife.
Hmm,
So that means that God never, ever gives up on anyone at any time, never sends anybody to hell, never punishes anyone. But when we choose other than what God wants, well, we're just choosing less than the best. And so there's going to be some natural implications. In
hmm.
this view, it's possible that everyone who's capable of choosing will eventually say yes to God. So sometimes
Oh, yeah.
called a hopeful universalism. But there's no guarantee that everyone will say yes, because that guarantee could only come from some sort of divine, unilateral, omnipotent act. And I don't think God has that kind of power. So that's my
So
view.
I love that. I have a couple
Good,
of questions. I'm gonna play devil's
good,
advocate for a second,
good,
only
good,
because
good,
I
good.
know what I won't think this way, but I know people who are listening who probably are thinking this way. So
Yeah,
what about where it says, okay, every knee shall bow, every tongue will confess to, you know what I mean? So
yeah,
how does that fit into it? Like, because that
yeah,
does say, but maybe that just means after the relentless pursuit. I don't know.
yeah.
Is that
I
what
don't
it's
know.
talking about?
Yeah. Well, here's something I learned a long time ago. The Bible can be used to support just about any eschatology
You're
on
so right. Oh
offer.
my word. That is
Yeah.
so true.
So I don't like stay up late at night worrying about particular biblical passages that might
Mhm.
not fit my view perfectly, because every view on offer has biblical
Yes,
passages that doesn't fit it perfectly. So something like that, I might say that's the goal, that everyone
right.
will bow. When people who have a more hell oriented view, they'll say, well, some people will kneel and acknowledge Jesus as Lord, but then have to go to hell. Um, that doesn't sound very good to me. So,
It
yeah,
just to me, I'm like, if there was a person on the earth who was that, I mean, that sounds Hitler-esque. Like, I don't
yes,
imagine why are we okay with God being that way? Not that I'm not trying
right.
to compare, but I'm just saying, like, if we were honest about it, it's coercion to say,
Yeah.
you can go to heaven or you can go to hell. It's your choice, but hell is
Yeah.
gonna, it's gonna suck. You know what I mean? Like, it's gonna suck forever and all of eternity, and there's no way out
Yeah.
of it. So to me, I would be like, okay, who in their right mind would say, I want my skin to burn off for all of eternity? I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay, one more thing.
Good, good.
What about the justice of God? Because that's what I
Yeah,
hear all the time. They're like,
me too.
Leslie, I get it. I understand there's a love of God, but there's this justice, and he's got to, satisfy that as well. Tell me what you
Yeah.
would say to someone like
And
that.
what usually justice means, there is some kind of eye for an eye, some kind of, you reap what you sow,
But
using biblical
Jesus
passages
said,
like
"You have heard
that.
it said." Didn't
Right,
Jesus up the
exactly.
ante? He said,
Yeah,
"You've heard it said, an eye for an eye." I
yeah. But
say,
I say to you,
forget.
and so that's exactly where I'm going. I
Hmm,
think we have to choose. We either have a God who's going to have to get some sort of payment, retribution, or justice. And justice is understood a lot of different ways, but here we're talking about some kind of a retribution, eye for an eye, or we have a God who forgives.
mm,
We have to make a choice here. I'm going with the forgiving God because I think love comes first in God.
mm,
And just about every Christian is going to say God is a forgiving God. It's just they have this tension that they hold there, and they think they
mm,
have to hold on to both. And
mm,
I'm to the place in my life where I say, if there's any idea or even biblical passage that undermines the relentless love of God, then I'm ready to chuck that other idea, even if it's right in the
same.
Bible.
I'm with
Um,
you
yeah,
100%. Yeah, I love that. And I do. I think we forget that Jesus, a lot of what I think maybe 6 times in the New Testament, he said, "You've heard it said this, but I
yeah,
say." And,
right.
if we're gonna live our life like Jesus, he questioned the Bible.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
you know what I
exactly.
mean? So, like, can we not do that still? And so anyway, I feel like if we really wanna live like him, it's all about love, and love does win in the end. Why is that so scary for people?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I'm to the place in my life now in which I would love others even if there was no God. I happen to
Mhm,
believe there is, but I think the life of love is just overall the best way to live. So I'm not so scared as I maybe was in the past. Maybe
mhm,
people are scared to love because sometimes love means having a kind of vulnerability that opens you up to being hurt by others. Now,
mm.
I'm not saying that, you should always just put yourself out there to be hurt all the time. You have to have certain protections and things. But, love does sometimes require a kind of risk. And maybe that's one reason why some people are reluctant to love. But
Mm.
once you start doing it over and over and you develop certain habits, you start to see there are a ton of positive benefits that come, even though sometimes you still get screwed. I'm not saying life is dandy for people
No.
who love all the time, but you start to see there are intrinsic values to loving that make it important for its own sake. In fact, I would say this, Leslie. When I was younger, I identified first as a Christian and then secondly as someone who tried to love. And today I identify first as someone who tries to love and secondly as a Christian. Because for
Mm.
me, love is even more important than any tribe or label or religion or any set of beliefs. Love is the heart of what I want to be about. Love is God's nature. So God
Yes.
always loves. Um, and then I interpret like the great commandments mean to say something like, well, like the Apostle Paul says in Ephesians, we ought to imitate God
Mm,
as dearly beloved children and live a life of love. That's what I
mm.
think it's all about.
I absolutely agree, and I think that I used to think that that's what I was doing.
Yeah.
I used to think, people knowing about Jesus Yeah, it was my responsibility as somebody who was a believer in Jesus Christ, who had received the Holy Spirit. It was my responsibility to let everyone know, because if they didn't hear, and I've been taught this, their blood would be on my hands when they
Right.
went to hell.
Yep.
Um, and so I was scared. I didn't want people to, because I do love people genuinely.
Yeah. Yep.
And like the thought of anyone going to hell was just, there was this underlying fear um, in my faith that I didn't see. I felt it, but I thought it was just anxiety or depression. I didn't realize it was fear, and it was manifesting in those until I
Mhm.
deconstructed. And I'm not
Mm.
saying I have no anxiety and no depression anymore. I have my days, but I will tell you, not having that fear
Mm.
anymore, I my mental health is exponentially better. I'm not on
Good.
any medications. I used to be on medications for this stuff, and I'm
Yep.
not anymore. I'm not saying everybody gets freed of this in deconstruction. I'm saying for me personally, that's how bad it was. And
Mhm.
so letting go of that and just choosing to love people and see them, as these children of God, like we're just all so loved right where we are,
Yep.
and embracing that. Oh, what a beautiful thing.
I totally agree. And I do also agree with you that I think people who, I'll just say, don't have an open and relational perspective about God, I'll say it, have a more conventional or classic view of God, they're apt to say they're trying to love, and they'll want to say God is a God of love. It's just that when you start examining the theology carefully, that God sends people to hell for eternity. That
Yeah.
God allows evil that God could stop. That God is so self-invested and so attracted to God's own self, it's hard to imagine how God could be attracted to us at all. There's all kinds of theological problems, and that then plays out in the average, we'll say, the average evangelical's life as them thinking that love means following a set of rules and having certain kind of beliefs in order so that they don't go to hell or other people don't go to hell. And I think you and I are saying, look, there's a better way to think about love that
Mhm.
actually looks at the well-being, the mental and physical health of others as primary, not whether or not you have the right set of beliefs or if you're on team Jesus rather than team Muhammad or whatever like that. um, yeah.
I love it. Oh my gosh, I could talk to you all day. This is so fun. And
I
I'm
enjoy it
I'm
too, Leslie.
no, I'm serious. I love this stuff. I love talking about it. I'm not like a theologian or a scholar. I can't even pronounce Friedrich, what's his name? I was on with
Schleiermacher?
yes,
Which
there you go. That one.
one? Yeah.
Well, I was talking to Chad the other day, and he was trying to
Oh,
get me to say it, literally the whole thing. I was like, I was like, I don't know. I should know this name because a lot of what he taught, I believe. So clearly he's
yeah,
made an impact on me, and I had no idea. So I am not your average scholar, but I
yeah,
love this stuff. And I love learning and growing. And what I like the most is being free.
yeah. Oh, that's beautifully said.
Yeah. I
Beautifully
just feel
said.
so
You know
free
what I'm
after this
gonna
conversation.
Good. I'm
Yeah.
going to send you another book. So you already have God After Deconstruction. You've read God Can't. I'm going to send
Yes.
you a book simply called Open and Relational Theology. And it's a
Okay.
non-technical overview of the ideas that we've kind of talked about here and that are you'll see in the God After Deconstruction book. And
Oh,
if you like the book and you want to talk, let's do another conversation.
okay. Oh my gosh. I would love that. That would be so fun. I'm going to get emails. I'm going to get DMs. People are going to be like, holy crap, that guy was great. So they're going to want you to come back anyway. So now I have you on the hook.
I love it. Yeah. Well, after
Anyway.
this is done, I'll get your address and I'd love to send you
Yeah.
that.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you so much. We can wrap this up right now, but boy, I can't even tell you how much I have enjoyed this, and now I'm looking forward to the next time. But in the
Yeah.
meantime, if you're listening, this is the time that you go to Amazon and you put in God After Deconstruction, and then you push that little button that says buy now, and then you confirm it. And a couple days
Uh,
later, you're going to be blessed like crazy. You're going to love it. I know you're going to love it. I haven't even read it yet, but I can't wait. So thank you, Tom. I
Thanks, Les.
appreciate your time. I appreciate You're just your demeanor, everything you brought to today has just been a real blessing for me. And I know for the listeners. So thank you.
Thanks for the opportunity to have the conversations.
Of course.